Hi there. I don't think it's news to anyone who's been paying even the slightest bit of attention to the raiding scene that we're seeing a drop in the number of 25-man raiding guilds. What used to be a 1 to 3 ratio of 25-man raiding guilds to 10-man guilds just 18 months ago has now dwindled down to a 1 to 9 ratio, with 10-man raiding guilds exceeding 25-man guilds by 9 times. Are we seeing the slow but gradual death of the larger sized raiding guilds? Or is this really mainly an issue that affects mainstream raiding guilds because it doesn't seem to be affecting the top tier raiding guilds as much? I doubt the picture is as bleak as all that, but I'm sure Blizzard has been watching the shifts in raiding, and this could actually impact the long-term design plans for the game. But in the meantime, I'd say we've got more of a player-driven issue or set of issues to think about. With more players establishing 10-man raiding guilds to raid, and 25-man raiding guilds losing that pool of resources to recruit from, recruitment is becoming a bigger problem. We've also got to think about the effects on computer performance, where some are saying that 10-man raiding guild is a smoother raiding experience than 25. And as servers are shifting more towards a significant number of 10-man raiding guilds competing for server first and so on, the competitive atmosphere has really been impacted for those that are retaining the 25-man raiding agenda. And I could say that while 25-man raiding guilds have often described the size of raiding as a kind of epic or more sort of vast experience, it's also much more challenging to organize logistically. And for those groups that really don't want to raid very much, it can be seen more of a hassle than a benefit, especially if the rewards don't seem to outweigh the work that's involved. So for those 25-man raiding guilds that are experiencing changes and perhaps players retiring from raiding and a drop in the number of those who are available for recruitment, they may really only have the choice of downsizing to 10-man if they want to continue raiding. So thinking about all of these issues and the current changes, I thought it would be interesting to explore in a Raid Observer Roundtable. And I really wanted to look at this from a mainstream raiding perspective because that's where it's being primarily affected. So as a result, I asked two leaders from a 25-man raiding guild that's had to work very hard to remain at the 25-man level. And I also invited, for additional perspective, Arx from DREAM Paragon and Maarten, who's a master's research student from the Netherlands and studying learning in World of Warcraft. I asked them all to join me as we looked at how it's been for 25-man raiding guilds in the recent expansion and what the focus might be for down the road. And I should add that while I pride myself on being aware of when I'm being trolled, I will say my hat goes off to Arx for successfully trolling me in our interview. What happened, you may ask? Well, listen and find out. Hi everybody and welcome back to the Raid Observer. Tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about what's been happening in raiding guilds. We've been seeing a downward trend in the number of 25-man raiding guilds that have been both starting and continuing raiding through the new Cataclysm raiding area. In fact, recent look at data has seen a very significant drop from what we were doing in Tier 10, which have been right before the launch of Cataclysm, and what we've been doing now. In fact, for every one 25-man raiding guild, we've got almost 9 10-man raiding guilds, whereas the difference between what the difference was, for example, in Tier 10 was we had 2.8 10-man raiding guilds for every one 25-man raiding guild. So there's been a big drop, and I don't think this is new news to anybody, but of course I think it's important to discuss, and I've asked a few special guests to join me to talk about this today. We're going to look at the issue from a few different perspectives. Interestingly enough, and this is probably not new news to anybody, we don't really have a major shift in top tier raiding as far as the shift from 25 to 10-man. They've seemed to have been able to not only retain their interest in 25-man raiding, but they also seem to have been able to continue to attract numbers, although they as well have been discussing the difficulty of having new people and getting new blood in, even at the top level. But of course it's been much harder for folks on servers where if everyone's been shifting down to 10-man raiding, for example, the pool of resources may be limited. Raiders who prefer to have a more casual schedule may find the intensity and the time commitment that can come with 25-man raiding at times difficult and perhaps less than ideal. So there could be a number of reasons why this is happening, but I thought it would be good for us to talk about. So very briefly, I'd like to say hi to our participants. Arx, I'll ask you to go first. Hi, tell us where you're from and so on.
Hey, I'm Arx. I play a Resto Druid in Paragon, and I still live on the second floor.
Great. Haven't been kicked out the second floor yet, have you?
No, not yet.
So let's see if people get the reference between the two versions of Raid Observer to catch that little joke. I'm happy to say that Raid Observer now seems to have some inside jokes. This is very good. Next, we have Celeus with us. Hi, Celeus.
Hi, I'm Celeus. I'm the Guildmaster of Bridgeburners, and we're based on Emerald Dream, a 25-man guild that's been in existence since the start of the Burning Crusade.
Very good. And we also have Maarten. Hi, Maarten.
Hi there, I'm Maarten. I'm a researcher actually. I'm doing research into learning behavior and processes in World of Warcraft right now. And I've also played for a while. I used to be the guild leader also of Bridgeburners. And I've been retired for, what is it? I think almost 3 years now.
So, true old timer, but with a little bit of historical benefit and a nice dose of research perspective, which is great. And finally, we have Olog with us. Hi.
Hi, I'm Olog, and officer and railer in Bridgeburners, and I live in Finland, play a production warrior.
Very good. Right, so we've got some different perspectives here, and I was very specific in inviting our guests this evening. Arx, if you all are aware, is of the Raiding Guild Paragon. Of course, DREAM Paragon is the top EU ranked raiding guild, and up until recently was the top ranked in the world raiding guild, and has had that sort of privilege of that position for quite a number of years now, and of course has a very different perspective from the raiding guild Bridgeburners. And Celius, Maarten, and Oleg all have associations both in the present and in the past with Bridgeburners, and that's been a 25-man raiding guild for a long time, but at a slightly different scale of progression, and I think a different kind of attitude towards the time frame. I would say, just knowing both of these guilds for everyone's benefit, Paragon fills the elite raiding guild as far as the time structure goes, and that would usually be guilds that ramp up for the new release of content to race to clear it as quickly as possible and ideally achieve those world first accomplishments. Whereas Bridgeburners really fills the time schedule frame of a what I would still call a hardcore or focused raiding guild, with a much more sort of casual time structure. They raid several nights a week and usually try to kind of keep that based and have a little bit more of a relaxed attendance ethos and mindset than you would find within a guild like Paragon, that has a lower tolerance for poor attendance for obvious reasons. So that's a slight difference there. And now what we wanted to talk about first, and I'm going to ask Arx this question, is, it's no big surprise, as I mentioned in my introduction, that 25-man rating is dwindling. Do you have an opinion as to why this is happening?
Oh god, I'll try to keep it in some limits. I mean, there are a number of reasons, and by far the most important one is that I could right here, I could gather 10 of my friends and start a 10-man raiding guild. It would be a proper guild, we could do some hard modes, not be a top guild, but still. But there's no way I could do it with 25 people. So essentially in a 10-man I could actually play with my friends, but if I were to go 25 I need to get some people that I didn't know that well, or perhaps even not know them at all. So it's just not as enjoyable, and there's also a lot of organizational work when you have to arrange 25 people's schedules around raiding and so forth. And yeah, that's kind of, I guess, the main point why people are gonna or have been doing that.
Do you agree with that, Maarten? Do you think it's mostly out of convenience, or do you think there's other factors that have gone into this sort of downsizing?
No, I think Arx is pretty much on point here. Um, I think it's a matter of barriers and effort. And what I've encountered also in my research is that the people who are still playing on 25 men right now really strongly identify with being a 25-man guild. And well, that shows that those people are pretty much playing and participating in the game in a very specific manner. And like Ark said, it's very easy. No, it's not very easy, but it's more accessible to an average player to do well on a 10-man guild just because it requires less organization. But a 25-man guild is just much more difficult.
And I think that that's a really important point, that the ones that do 25-man raids now, like, identify themselves as 25-man guilds. I think that the ones that that really didn't care have already made the transition to 10-man, and that's part of the reason why there was such a big drop in the amount of 25-man guilds.
Yeah, exactly.
So, when do you think the problem started, Celeus? Did you notice when there was a drop, especially when you think about how things have changed on your own server on Emerald Dream?
I mean, watching the servers across and talking to people generally, it seemed to happen a little bit towards the end of Wrath, but I think it was the process was probably speeded up as we hit Cataclysm, and they've changed the loot and the difficulty levels to try and match them, and obviously you can get the same items in both things. I think that sort of was the watershed moment where everyone sort of had the freedom to choose between the two, and in a lot of cases people decided they wanted to go 10. But I think also when you talk to people out there, there's a lot of people who were forced to go 10 because it was path of least resistance, or they couldn't keep going in 25 at the current time, so 10 was the only option they had available to them.
And Oleg, when you look at your own server or when you've looked at other servers, have you noticed kind of this widespread, like almost a surprise in how few 25-man raiding guilds there are on each individual server? There's in fact a few servers that seem to have no 25-man raiding guilds doing heroic content at all. So did that surprise you?
A little bit, yeah. And on Emerald Dream, I think you saw like one or two 25-man guilds besides us, but not quite as progressed. So, and yeah, I think the situation is quite similar on quite a few other servers as well. So,
Alex, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I think that it really didn't help that tier 11 was kind of brutal. It came right like around start of December, and the first guilds managed to beat it like halfway into January or something. So most of the like still hardcore guilds were stuck on it for a very very long time. So I'm guessing many people felt kind of burned down after that and wanted to opt for something perhaps slightly more casual, playing with friends and so on.
Yeah. Maarten, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, in the same vein as we've been talking about this, there's a social and more technical part about the difficulty of being a 25-man guild. And I think the technical part is obviously of organization, herding 25 cats instead of 10. But one of the main issues in the social aspect is that if you put people together with a mission, they are going to be more likely to work together, but they are not very likely to like everyone in the guild as much at the same time. So in a 25-man guild, there are more often concessions made in the sense that people that don't like each other just put up with each other to get the job done, and all kinds of varying levels between that. So I think that one of the main attractions of 10-man guilds is that you can do the same things and get the same achievements, while at the same time, yeah, sorry for putting it this way, suffering less unpleasant people, or suffering a lower risk of having to play with unpleasant people. And I think that's for most people a very important part here.
So it seems to boil down to that social element. That seems to be what you're suggesting. That a lot of times what will dictate why we want to do something is the complexity or the desirability for lack of complexity in that social aspect of raiding. Meaning you
Yes,
don't
I
want as
think.
many difficult people. I mean, is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, it's basically if you have an overriding desire, like maybe 25 men would drop better loot or give better achievements or anything like that, then you could say, okay, well, I'll take the social issues for granted, or I'll accept them because I think those other things are more important. But when everything is equal, then the social aspect, I think, for many people becomes a priority. And then in that case, 10 men might have the edge on 25 for many people.
Mm, interesting. Olog, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can totally agree with that. Like from raid leader perspective, there's in a 25 setting, there's always seems to be like a few pairs of people that just get along, but don't really that much like each other. Whereas I've done some 10-man raiding as well, like on alts in our guild, and I think there's a lot less that in the 10-man setting.
Well, I'm just going to insert myself in this because unlike all of you, I actually raided in a 10-man raiding guild that was specifically meant for that. And while that is true, you do have a smaller range of, I suppose, there's usually always one or two outliers, and I've found this to be quite consistent as well, as you guys were all saying. In every raiding guild, there's always one or two who seem to be sort of outside of the sort of inner circles of the guild socially, either by choice, because some people just prefer to not get really deeply connected to the rest of their guild mates, or they may just not quite gel with the rest of the group. But that actually does also exist in 10-man raiding guilds. It's just a little bit more overt when it does happen. And sometimes if the member is not indispensable, there's a decision process basically that has to be made between whether that person's playing a role that's truly indispensable and very difficult to replace, and perhaps will put up with the difficulty, which is usually what will happen in any raiding guild, because you need that skill or you need that role being filled. And perhaps there can be a lower tolerance for it, but I think you do find that in 10-man raiding guilds as well, although obviously on a slightly smaller scale. But I would say that it just seems to be something, a part of the world. It's like any job situation you have, any environment, if you've been a student in a classroom, there's always one or two students that don't quite gel with the rest of the students. Not to say that's a good or bad thing, to be honest, but it can impact the environment. But did you want to add to that as well, Alex? Or
Yeah, I've done a bit of 10-man raiding on the side as well, occasionally, and
mm-hmm.
I feel what you say. I mean, there can be people in 10-man raids as well who you don't get along with, who are maybe kind of loners or something, and it's kind of felt that the effect was emphasized since you have less people to go around. So the silent ones or the ones who don't get along kind of pop up a bit easier. And funnily enough, I think that actually like the people who are always talking in Paragon, like on our raids, could probably fit into a 10-man group. So yeah, kind of depends a lot on the group composition, I guess. And as
Yeah, yeah.
what
Go
Maarten
ahead.
said a bit earlier, I think that you really need a reason to be a 25-man guild, not the other way around. I mean, since 10 is the path of least resistance organizationally, so I think that the burden of proof kind of goes that way. So you need to have a reason to be 25, not the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point of view there. Well, what I wanted to say actually, to sort of because it segues really nicely into my next question, which is, as I said at the beginning, we do have a difference between what's happening in the state of the top tier raiding guilds and what's happening in the more mainstream, and we're seeing a lot less. I mean, the Dream Paragon guild that was raiding 2 years ago is still a 25-man raiding guild today, whereas it's more likely that the Dream Paragon guild that was perhaps maybe server top of server or something like that, maybe a different type of guild ranked 600th or 700th in the world, could very well be a 10-man raiding guild today, unlike its condition 2 years ago. So what do you think it is, Arx, that's kept you guys? Is it that idea, or the mission of staying 25 that's kept you guys there? Is it you do have a better pool of talent and skill to be able to attract? Although I would actually posit that that's not really the case, especially for you guys being a Finnish language only guild. So why is it, do you think, though, that the top tier people have managed to stay at the 25-man level that were there before?
Uh, it's certainly not due to the amount of people that you can recruit. It's actually really, really hard for any top guild to recruit players. You'd expect that there are a lot of like applies, but there really aren't that many quality applies to any top guild, much less us, since we only accept Finns or Finnish speaking people. But the real reason, I think, why we haven't kind of downsized to 10 man, I guess, is that, and I'm generalizing a bit here, but the top guilds, the competitive guilds, we don't play to raid, we play to compete. And in the European and US servers, that means that you have to do 25-man raids, because 10-mans just don't have the competition right now. And also an important part for many members is the prestige you get for scoring those high ranked kills. And even if you get prestige from the community, you don't get it from the peers, which is arguably even more important. And yeah, it's just there isn't an existing ecosystem of 10-man top guilds, like really, really top guilds. So there is very little reason for the top 25-man guilds to downsize.
That's a really interesting point, actually. I mean, do you think that's why when Insidia started having serious problems after the LFR ban situation in December, and they could have tried to keep going 10-man, but instead they just opted to fold, and members went primarily to Envy and a few to Method, kind of to keep raiding with the 25-man raiding guild? It was almost as though the idea of staying at 10-man just didn't appeal to them as a group, and they would rather move to other guilds and just let Insidia die naturally. Do you think that's why that happened, or is there, other speculation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just if you have the option of either quitting or merging with another guild or downsizing to 10-man, I actually think that breaking up is more appealing to a top 25-man guild right now. I think it's certainly changing slowly towards 10-man being more acceptable as a really elite raiding environment as well, but it just isn't the time yet. So it's actually easier to break down than move to 10-man, ironically.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that. And I think you raised an interesting point as well about the ecosystem issue, because, obviously the contrast is Korea and the Korean serving guilds, where they love raiding on 10-man, and you'll find multiple servers that have just 10-man raiding guilds, and I think that's what they really love to do, and that's been quite widely sort of discussed, and you can see the numbers as well when you look at the actual rankings. So very interesting. Celeus, I wanted to ask you a question, and I'm putting you a bit on the spot here. Do you still enjoy 25-man raiding as an individual? Just mean as a player, and I know you're a tank in your guild. So do you actually enjoy the experience still, personally, compared to 10-man raiding?
Yeah, personally, I prefer 25 certainly to 10. I think it feels more fun, more epic, more. It's more of a challenge, I would say, nowadays, certainly, and it just feels a bit better. I mean, when I've sort of started playing MMOs, it was all you've got that mentality. It's all about getting a group of people together, and 10-man doesn't quite feel right for me at the moment. I know a lot of people won't agree, but that's just me personally.
Yeah, it's interesting because that word epic does sort of get used a lot when we talk about the scale and the sort of the experience of the larger size group raiding. And a lot of people, I think, and again, I mean, is this just sort of where we've evolved? Because, we've had even bigger size raiding groups in World of Warcraft before. And there was a bit of tension when we were being told that we were downsizing to 25-man raiding size back in the day, and people were sort of lamenting the reduction. Others were probably a bit relieved, especially those that may have to deal with the logistical side. But I think there's always been that feeling of scale, and sort of the word epic kind of comes to mind a little bit. Um, do you do you feel the same way, Olo? Because I know you sort of partner with Celeus in the raid leading and in the tanking. And I mean, do you individually like doing 25-man raiding more than 10-man, or is it the same to you?
They're certainly different. I do enjoy 10-man as well when I've done it occasionally, but and I think it's a different experience, although that may be also because our 10-man raids are like more laid back, whereas the 25-man raids are much more competitive. So that may be the reason as well. But yeah, dealing with some mechanics is still different than 10-man. I think I do prefer 25-man though in general, but 10-man isn't bad in any way either.
Yeah, I mean, again, having done both myself as well, I will say that there's something uh, there's something more intimate about 10-man raiding. I'm more aware of what's going on, and I'm more aware of what all of my teammates are sort of doing. It's a little bit easier to sort of single people out. I don't mean for negative, I just mean in general. You can sort of, oh right, so and so's over there and I'm here and so on. With 25-man raiding, it's just that sort of complexity and largeness. I will say, when I talk to non-gamers, non-raiders, about their observations of raiding, and I try and explain what's going on, without a doubt, when they watch video footage of 25 people trying to do the raiding content, it has more of the sort of gasp-worthy effect on the people watching. They don't really understand what's happening. They see lots of numbers flying around and lights and a scary-looking monster in the middle of the room and lots of little dotted people with letters over their heads, running around. But they feel it as well. So there must be something to that size feeling. So I suppose for me, 10 is intimate and 25 is just kind of busy. It's like the difference between being in the country versus the city, I suppose. And then in different times they appeal for different reasons. So I don't know. What do you think, Arx? Having done both yourself as well, I mean, how do you feel about 25-man raiding? I know you do it to compete, but there's still that little player inside you that started at level 100 years ago that, still there, right? I mean, how do you feel about it?
I was never level 1. Now,
He was born level 85.
yeah, exactly. Uh, I I really don't want to get into the whole difficulty discussion. So I do have to say that like achieving something in 25 gives me more of a sense of accomplishment. As you said, 10-man feels more kind of busy, and 25 feels kind of different. And I'm not saying one is necessarily better than the other, but it's a really different experience for me at least. So I do prefer 25, like the feeling I get from 25, but on the other hand, it's quite the hassle to actually get that many people to play with. Um, I was gonna raise up one point that isn't really discussed that often, I think. Has to do with performance. I mean, some of the 25-man encounters, especially if you have to do some raid leading, so you have to have some add-ons like recounts and perhaps some other ones on, they scale really horribly with raid size. So if you're playing 25-man, for example, Ultraxion is a really great example of this. My i7 feels like a Pentium 2 there. I can pretty much show the FPS with the digits on my single hand. Whilst on 10-man, the game is completely smooth on pretty much every encounter I've tried. So I can imagine that it's not really a pleasant experience for a new player who has just bought a $3,000 computer and goes into a raid and it's like a slideshow. So
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. The sort of differences of experiences that have nothing to do with, and I'm actually really glad that we're steering away from the word difficulty, because I think it's if I'm honest, I think it's a pointless discussion. But I do think that the variations in experience and perception, and also even literal technical performance, are actually relevant comparison points. So when we look at 10 to 25, and I don't think we'll ever be able to satisfactorily determine a difficulty level, as hard as we might try. But I know, Oleg, did you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, and about the um, computer performance issues in 25-man, it's just not the add-ons, but in general, 25-man seem to take quite a lot more horsepower from the computer. One thing which I think we'll get a bit more into later in the interview is that we got some people from a 10-man guild joined Bridgeburners recently, and some of them had quite a few problems scaling up to 25 because they got much lower frame rate in the 25-man raids, and they couldn't properly really raid at all. So that's really a bit of a problem there.
Yeah, that's interesting point. Did you want to add anything to that, Alex?
yeah, about the like measuring difficulty in raids, I think that the community has actually nailed it down pretty well. I mean, whichever environment we kill the bosses first in, that's the easier one.
Interesting point, actually. Very interesting point. But at the
I
same
think my
time, I'm not
joke
sure
went
if that
kinda
really
swoosh there.
translates it. I know, sorry. I was trying to take you seriously, and I was thinking, no, it can't be serious. So, yeah, no.
Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
I know. That's okay. That's okay. It's that Paragon humor again. It's gone awry. So,